This is the Whole Care Network. Helping you tell your story one podcast at a time. Content presented in the following podcast is for information purposes only. Views and opinions expressed in this podcast are solely those of the host and guest and may not represent the views and opinions of the Whole Care Network. Always consult with your physician for any medical advice, and always consult with your attorney for any legal advice. And thank you for listening to the Whole Care Network.
I wish I'd known about padding anything with hard corners before my husband started falling. In this episode, we're talking about overall home safety for your care receiver. We have 3 main tips. Sue, you about ready to get started?
I am. Welcome. We are Sue Ryan
and Nancy Treaster.
This podcast brings our years of experience in a variety of family caregiving roles to prepare you to navigate your caregiving journey.
We're sharing our personal experiences, not medical advice. And because it's our passion to support you on your journey, we believe no topic is off limits.
We're bringing you practical tips
and candid conversations
about the good, the bad, and
yes, the ugly
in family caregiving.
Let's get started.
In the areas of wandering and leaving them alone, we recorded separate podcasts, and we have the links to those in the show notes. What we're talking about today is overall safety in the home. And when we're thinking about their safety needs, these are going to be unique for each one of the journeys we're on, each of our loved ones. And so we want to be looking at them with curious eyes on their journey and exploring exactly what's happening day in and day out, as if it were, for example, a young child. We don't know what they're going to get into. And so we look with curious eyes about, well, what could they possibly get into? And we don't think about, well, they would never get into something like that. We want to be using the same caution for our care receiver, and it's assume nothing. There are so many things going on with them in the journey that's changing for them. For example, their vision is changing. Their depth perception is changing. Their stability, which means their gait, is changing. They see shadows where they didn't used to see them. Their ability to connect with what something was. For example, you see it as a chair. They might not. They might start talking to it. So they don't necessarily connect with things. So as they go on, their ability to connect with things is shifting, as well as they go throughout the day, their brains have been running on high all day long. And toward the middle of the afternoon, they've got what I call tired brain syndrome. Their brains have been going for a long time. And especially earlier in the journey, they can become more fearful or more frustrated because they still know that they've got a problem and they're not connecting. And so we want to make sure that we're helping them, especially when we see them getting frustrated or fearful.
The message really is observe and adjust, because home safety is not one and done.
Oh.
We're constantly observing and constantly adjusting. I said we have 3 main tips, so you want to start with tip 1, Sue?
Absolutely. In the Wandering episode, we talk about registering early on with the emergency medical teams. The other thing for us to do that's as much for us as it is for our care receiver is called File of Life. And the link to that's in the show notes. You'll get a document that you fill out that's got information about your loved one, and then you fill one out for yourself, because sometimes the emergency could be with you. So one of the things that you do is you fill all the information out. It's got their name, medical information, hobbies, things like that, other things so that they can have a good conversation with them. And then you're given a decal to put either on your front door or on your front window so that if the emergency team comes, they know that information about File of Life is on the refrigerator, and it's very helpful to them.
That's a great tip. I really like it. The second tip is about childproofing your home. And when it's time to childproof is not a guarantee. It's nothing we can tell you. You'll just notice that your loved one is starting to be more curious. Just like Sue said, look at things through curious eyes. They're starting to be more curious and they're starting to get into things. Now, think about this for a second. They used to have a lot of activities that they were able to be involved in. And now they're restless. And so they're going to get into things. These are the only activities they have right now.
Yeah.
So that's all that's left.
They're like, I want something to do.
They need something to do, exactly.
Yeah.
So part of this is just the natural part of what they're going to do when they wander around the house during the day. But in order to keep them safe, we need to childproof. Let's think about childproofing from the perspective first. Let's just start in the kitchen. I think that's the easiest place to start. That's where the most hazards are anyway. First, think about your cleaning supplies. Think about anything that's on your kitchen counter or accessible to them. Cleaning supplies are a good example. Knives are a good example. Those need to go under in cabinets or in a separate room somewhere else. If you put them under in cabinets, you just get childproof safety cabinet locks so that you can lock your cabinets to keep them out of wherever you've stored things and wherever the things that are potentially dangerous, like toxic cleaning supplies, are. Anything they do have access to that's on the counter, please make sure it's not toxic so that you're not risking them getting into it and drinking it or doing something with it that they shouldn't. Also in your kitchen is the stove and stove knobs. My husband loved to twist the stove. We have a gas stove. So the good news is they make childproof stove knob covers. The refrigerator, the freezer, if they're opening and closing those regularly, they make locks for the refrigerator and freezer if that's starting to be a problem. One of Sue's friends' husband left the refrigerator open all night long.
All night long.
Not exactly what you want.
You can also put chimes on. She learned that afterward, yes.
You can put chimes or a lock, actually. Very good point.
Yep.
The garbage. My husband loved to get into the garbage before we put a lock on the garbage so that a childproof lock on the garbage so he couldn't get in it, because that was, needless to say, a mess. And the garbage disposal. If it's something they have accessibility and an interest in, then you can put a cover over the switch for the garbage disposal as well. So that's the kitchen. Now let's kind of walk around to the rest of the house for a minute. So first, probably at this point, once they're starting to get into things, if you haven't already, this is a good time to limit the amount of space they can get into in the house. You can use those childproof doorknob covers to put on the outside of any doors any rooms that you're not going to make safe, so that they can't get in those rooms when during the day when you're letting them wander around. So limit the amount of space they can get into, and then we're going to childproof or at least safety-proof that space. In addition to the rooms they can get into, think about the windows. So, funny story, my husband, once they're restless at this point, there's a lot of fidgeting going on. So he would fidget with the window sash locks.
Which he had never fidgeted with before. They'd never been.
No, we never did that before. No interest in the window sash locks before. Now all of a sudden they're very entertaining. So unlock the window sash. The top of the window falls down. It's the middle of the winter. I'm hauling the ladder up from the basement into the house to try to get the window locked back up so that the cold air is not blowing in our house. So window sash locks, they're literally keyed sashes with keys, and you just put the key somewhere else so they can't unlock the windows. Lamps are another form of entertainment, apparently. I think, Sue, you had this as well as I did.
Yes, we did.
So I probably now have about 20% the amount of lamps in my house in the area that my husband can wander in than I did before, because lamps are another thing to fidget with, and he picks the lamps up and tries to carry them away, and they're still attached to the wall. So minimize the number of lamps if your loved one finds lamps interesting. So remember, this is customized to curiosity and what your loved one is curious about. I have a gas fireplace, the fireplace key. My husband wanted to fidget with that. That also now is underneath the cabinet. And steps. Steps,
Huge.
If they have access to steps, and they have to have access to steps. Sue was talking about depth perception and vision challenges, and depth perception definitely shows itself in a big way when it comes to steps. Part of that is You can walk my husband up the steps, but don't ask him to come back down because he is completely scared to death to come down steps. As a matter of fact, to take him to the doctor, he'd have to get down only 2 steps into our garage. And they were painted gray, which is the same color as the garage floor. And I'm telling you, it took me as long to get him down those 2 steps than it took to drive to the doctor's office. Heck, probably for the whole doctor's appointment. So I came back after the first time. I thought, this has got to be a depth perception problem. So I went to the hardware store, bought some white paint, and painted just a white strip on the end of each step. And the next time he had to go into the garage, amazing the difference in his confidence to walk down the steps. Now, if your steps are indoors, I found a site that actually recommended reflective tape at the end of each step, but it's the same concept. How do you make it easier for them to know where that step ends and the next step begins? Another thing, once you're letting them wander inside the house, you've safety-proofed as much as you possibly can, is you might want to consider getting cameras for inside the house. If you're not going to follow them around everywhere they go, or the space they're in is not so limited that you can just look behind you and see them, if you're going to let them wander around the house where they've got a little more free reign, you can use indoor cameras. You can have app on your phone or on an iPad where you can see what they're doing. Yeah. This is also helpful to keep an eye on how things are changing. What are they becoming curious about now that they weren't so curious about last week? It's another way to make sure that you observe and adjust for home safety. That's really about home safety, but there's a tangential topic I want to talk about here, which is valuables. And understanding that while they're fidgeting, they may run into some of your valuables or breakable items. So you're going to want to just put those away for now. Your valuables and breakable items do not need to be out into the world of entertainment, becoming entertainment now. Sue loves this story because it is entertaining. We used to keep cash in one of our drawers. And one day I saw the cash that morning. I went in the drawer to get a pen, and there was the cash like it always is. And later in the day, I went into that drawer and the cash was gone. Well, there's only 2 of us here, so there was no one to blame, except for I was sure that Kim had taken the cash and put it somewhere, my husband. So I went back. I have indoor camera, so I went back to the video history in the indoor camera and saw where, just in that room, saw him get into the drawer, saw him take the cash, watched through the other cameras in the other rooms, saw that he went back into the bedroom and then back into the closet. There is no camera in the closet, so then my detective skills had to come into play. Went back into the closet, got in there, started searching in the closet. Somewhere in here is the money, most likely. In his shoes, stuffed in the toe, goodness, I deserve a lot of credit for finding it, was the money. Not just the money, his watch, one of his rings. There was all sorts of interesting, valuable items, I guess, that he wanted to hide from other people that were stuffed in the toes of his shoes. Thank goodness I did not take those shoes to Goodwill, or someone would have had a nice surprise, I think. So keep an eye out for your breakables, for your valuables. These are once they're in this fidgeting stage, they don't need to be so accessible.
Nancy, there's one other part of the breakables and valuables that you may want to share.
Yeah, so I called Sue, as I typically would do when something was escaping me as to how I was going to fix this. And, she had a good point. They're in a fidgeting stage. That's part of what's happening. And the only things they have to entertain themselves with are the breakables and valuables and the lamps and the other things you have in their area that they're wandering in. So replace those with children's toys. So I did, actually. Some big plastic children's toys that I bought the rings, actually. He loves to unscrew the bottom of the rings and carry the rings around. Other children's toys, find something else for them to fidget with. There are even things online in sites that are focused on people with dementia that are called fidget toys. So go out there and just replace them. Give them something to fidget with. The fidgeting's not going away. They're restless, and they no longer have access to other activities. So help them out.
I got a fidget blanket. There's a dementia fidget blanket, and I got one of those for Jack, and we had several of those throughout, and it's amazing. It's comforting for them.
Well,
got
good.
something to do. Yeah, different textures and things like that, yes. One of the other things toward the topic with Kim's shoes that I learned in a support meeting was that early in the journey, when they're putting things down and they're not necessarily remembering where they put them, they often feel like someone is stealing from them.
Oh, yeah.
And one of two things happens. They either feel like somebody's stealing things from them, or they can't find it, and they get very agitated and frightened because they can't find something. And I've got to have it, I've got to have it, I've got to have it. So with either one of those, first of all, having the camera is very helpful, because almost every single time, it's just that they've put it in a separate place and they don't know where it is. However, in the support meeting, one of the women said that her husband was having this challenge, and she said she couldn't find anything. I mean, it would disappear, and she had no idea. She'd gone to any of the obvious places. One day she was changing the bed, and her finger touched something. She lifted up the mattress, and between the mattress and the box springs were all these things her husband had put there because he felt that was a safe place.
Oh, my goodness.
And so...
and it was apparently.
It was a very safe place. Yeah. So first of all, don't donate anything without looking through it. And if they are having agitation or frustration with that, often it is because they've found some place to put things away. And then one of the other things with that is if they are having something like still their wallet or something else that they could misplace, make sure there's nothing actually valuable in it.
Very good point. Very good point. Okay. Are we ready for tip 3?
We are ready for tip 3.
So tip 3 is about minimizing fall risks.
Oh, yes.
One of the first things is to really talk a bit about falling. So falling it's inevitable, unfortunately. We're going to do everything we can to minimize falling, but also recognize the fact that it is inevitable. Part of falling is depth perception. I really believe that's a big part of the falling. And part of it is they're more unstable and they start to shuffle their feet. So Sue actually, once again, another tip from Sue early on in my journey as a caregiver was watch out for the rugs. Because when they start to shuffle their feet, the rugs become a fall hazard. So that was really good advice. Thank you, Sue.
You're welcome.
And for more than one reason, because also, once incontinence starts, you're going to be happy to have your rugs put away somewhere else. So roll those rugs up if you have area rugs and put them under a bed. You can get them back out later. But rugs, once you observe the shuffling of the feet or the incontinence starts, the rugs need to find another home.
Absolutely. And another one is fall tracking devices. And there are a couple of applications of that. One is the ones that are physically on you. So whether it's on the wrist, whether it's in the shoe, whether it's in the phone, around the neck, one of the things that it is making sure that you know where they are at any point in time with the fall risk. The other one is, to your point about having the cameras, is that we can monitor them and monitor how they're wandering and where they're wandering and things they may be getting in that could lead to them falling. Or if they do fall over something, it helps us rearrange their area so that they can keep, what we want is their independence as long as possible. We want them to be able to wander as much as possible because that means they're walking and they're getting exercise, and that may be the only exercise they're getting. So we want to make sure the environment's as safe as possible. And then next, we're getting to the one that you wish you had known earlier.
Yeah, that is absolutely true. Well, you go ahead with the tip, and I'll explain later why I wished I had it.
Why you wish it was?
Yeah.
That's the padding on the corners. And then you can also have padding across the counters. There are all different kinds of ways you can do it. You can use pool noodles. You can do other things. But anywhere, and especially when you're observing them, look at the areas where they might potentially fall. And one of the things that's a trigger for that, like Nancy pointed out, is if they think they're seeing shadows. So one of the things that you can do, even without the padding up, before the padding on the corners, is looking at lighting. I mean, light it up like it's an airplane landing so that they're not going to have shadows in the area where they're going to reach down for it. And then yet, if there is something where they might reach down or they might start to fall, have the padding that will minimize any risk they've got or any harm they do.
Yes, and the only reason I wanted to wait is I want to merge the padding and the cameras together for a second. So in my husband's bedroom, one time, the next morning, he has a cut on his head. And we're wondering, where did this cut come from? This is strange. So once again, using video history, I was able to go back and see that he had reached down to pick something up while he was wandering around the bedroom at night, and he'd come back up and hit the corner of one of the dressers in his room. So we put the padding on the corner of the dresser. So using the combination of things, had I known before about the padding, I probably could have thought that all the way through without him ever having to get the cut on his head to begin with.
That's why we're doing the podcast, so we can help other people learn from the things that we wish we had known.
Yes,
we had known earlier.
Yes,
and then the next one is, okay, we got the showers. And there's a lot to do with safety with shower entry. Some of it, of course, is obvious. How safe is it for them to get into the shower, whether that's on their own or whether it's assisted? We had a walk-in shower, and yet I went into the shower with my husband for the longest time. I took everything out that he could reach for, and that might distract him. I also put him in the best environment to be safe. There were grips on the floor so he wouldn't trip or fall. I made sure the lighting was really good so there wasn't any kind of a shadow anywhere. And yet, even with that, as the journey goes on, just getting into the shower can become fearful for them. That forget about taking the shower. They don't want to get in. They see this as something that's frightening for them, and we can't get them into the shower. And Nancy,
I noticed that
you got a tip on that. Yeah,
I did. So my husband, I could see. We've been married 34 years, so you sort of just can read the expression on their face at that point. I could see that it wasn't so much the shower that was the problem. It was getting into the shower that was the problem. He was scared to get in there, and I believe it was depth perception oriented. So this went on for several months where I still we had a big battle over taking a shower because I didn't realize that eventually he wasn't going to take a shower anymore.
That's true.
And there's plenty of fabulous products on the market that you can use to keep your loved one clean, and they smell great. It's all good. So why did I fight over the shower? Had someone told me up front, they're eventually not going to get in the shower, I would have saved both of us 3 or 4 months worth of agony fighting over the shower, which he won anyway. So, he won that battle. So I fought and lost, but for no good reason.
But the helpful part of that is that there are a variety of different reasons why they might be resisting that. And so this is where you observe and adjust. And we had different reasons why we adjusted. You've got yours. So with all of that, it is. And then ultimately it did with Jack as well. It's nope, we're not doing the showers.
Nope,
the showers are gone. And then another part of the safety is those putting the grips on their socks, having grip socks, and the same thing with shoes to make sure that their feet are never uncovered to where they could slip, especially if you've taken rugs off that might give some traction. Depending on the kind of flooring you have, they could have a chance of slipping. And as their gait becomes less stable or they stub their toe, if they've got the grippers on, at least it's a little bit of something else. And then I mentioned it before, lighting. As we go through, observe with those curious eyes, the lighting where you've got the shadows. I mean, you might have I'm looking over here at some lighting we've got over a picture. Well, that created shadows for my husband, and that looks different. So look at any of the places where the lighting might be an issue. And then, Nancy, you kind of introduced it, but I think it's something important for us to talk more about, is that as our journey goes on, they are going to fall.
Yeah. And
my husband outweighed me by more than 100 pounds. When he falls, there's only so much I can do to lift him up. So I've worked on keeping him safe, and I've worked on minimizing the fall risk. But when they fall, and they may, you've got a few options. I can call 911, or I can do what you did.
Right. So when my husband...
I mean, depending on the fall, you still call
Yes.
911, but
Yes. Yeah. So depending on how bad it is. My husband does fall periodically. That's just part of where we are in our journey. And if someone else is here, we can still get him up with the two of us. But often I'm alone. And if I'm alone and he falls, we just finally got past the point where I couldn't help him up. Early on I could help him up, but now he doesn't know what to do. And he's 6'2" and all legs. There is no way I'm getting him up. So I did get something called, it's a transfer lift. And I'll tell you, it's almost like a dolly for a person. So it looks like a dolly, and you scoot it up to their backside, and you pull them onto it, and you hook them with a belt, and then you press the button, and it lifts them up to chair height, and then you undo the belt, and he steps off of it, and all is good. And that thing is wonderful, and it has kept me from having to call 911, which is even better. Technically, the name of the product that I use is called an Indeelift, but a transfer lift is something you may want to invest in.
And you've got a link to that in the show notes.
Yes, ma'am. So let's summarize. Today we talked about overall home safety for your care receiver. We had 3 main tips. The first tip is about creating a file for life. The second tip, childproofing your home. The third tip, minimize the risk of falling. And I know in this episode, we had a lot of detail under these tips. So it probably feels like a lot, but it is doable. It is manageable. You will get your arms around this, and you will be able to handle it.
Yes, you will. And we're here for you. We're all on this journey together.